You won't believe what transpired on that chilly night when the city of Atlanta hung suspended, as if the neighborhood's own heartbeat had ground to a halt. It started with a flash, a single streetlight flickering against the darkness, a humming, then nothing, then, in slow motion, as if under a terrible spell, the others went out too. Storefronts that had been vibrant with neon lights faded into blackness. Homes lost their light, and streets became strange and eerie. In moments, the neighborhood went from normal to strange. Mothers scrambled for candles, fathers struggled to locate flashlights, and children pushed their faces against the windows, staring, wide-eyed at the sudden blackness. A murmur of unease circulated across the block. Shopkeepers lowered their metal shutters, standing outside stores with arms crossed, muttering questions nobody had answers to. Cars crept along at stalled traffic lights, their horns shattering the tense hush, and then came the actual trouble. The crackle of arcing wires. A shower of yellow sparks hissed out of a nearby transformer, casting brief flashes of light that only intensified the feeling of peril. Others stepped back, grasping their coats more tightly, looking around nervously at the utility workers who had begun to converge. The city had dispatched engineers, guys and gals in yellow vests with tool belts around their waists. They muttered in urgent tones, kneeling beside power cabinets, gesturing at blueprints on their slates. But the longer they labored, the more it seemed they were baffled. Minutes turned into hours. The neighborhood buzzed with restless frustration. How long's this gonna take? One shopkeeper shouted, his voice laced with irritation. Losing money every minute the lights are out. Another man worried aloud about his elderly mother hooked up to an oxygen machine inside their home. Parents tried to soothe frightened children, wrapping them in blankets, while elderly couples stood on their porches, shaking their heads. Wherever you gazed, faces mirrored the same thing: hopelessness. The engineers attempted everything. They reinitialized circuits, bypassed connections, checked voltage, but each try concluded the same way, with sparks flying from wires and monitors emitting red alerts. The blackout was not merely a matter of a blown fuse. Something more profound was shattered, and nobody was able to repair it. That's when a buzz propagated throughout the masses. They started to see a slight figure on the edge of the chaos. A boy, lean, wiry, not more than 15, swathed in a tattered hoodie that hung off his shoulders, scuffed shoes, frayed jeans at the knees. A small backpack hooked to one strap, as if it held all that was left to him. Dark eyes scanning the workers, the wires, the monitors, with rapid intent. Nobody gave him much attention at first. In places like Atlanta, homeless children were, unfortunately, not an unusual sight. People would learn to ignore them, their thoughts preoccupied with themselves. But there was something that was different about this boy. He was not gazing at the crowd or holding out for food or money. He was gazing at the power grid, as if he could see through it. He crept closer, inch by slow inch, until he stood beside the engineers. And then, in a voice so steady and so calm that it pierced through the din of the agitated mob, he began to speak. "I know what's wrong," he said gently. The laborers spun around, surprised at the sound of a child's voice. Some laughed, shaking their heads. A few rolled their eyes, too exhausted and too fed up to be bothered with what seemed like rubbish. But the boy did not give up. He stood on his toes, raised his chin, and said again, more forcefully, "I know what's wrong. Let me try." The words lingered in the air, odd and bold. Others around him grew quiet. A shopkeeper laughed in derision. "Kid, you don't even have a place to stay. You think you can repair the city's electricity?" Someone else grumbled. "He's just attention-seeking." His name was Jordan, 15, lanky for his age but thin, with eyes that searched constantly. There was a restless energy to him, the type you find only in kids who've seen too much, done too much. He moved with a quiet self-assurance, although it was compounded by the heavy burden of survival. Life had already hammered him hard, making him what he needed to be to survive. Jordan had been homeless for almost a year. His parents, shelter and guiding stars, were nowhere to be found. His mother, a gentle soul with a sweet laugh, had died of a disease they couldn't even afford to get treated for. His father, shattered by loss, had wandered off, and Jordan was left to fend for himself in the world that didn't seem too keen on noticing him. He jumped from shelter to shelter, occasionally securing a cot, other nights sleeping on park benches. Hunger was the norm, cold was omnipresent, and invisibility was his constant friend. Yet in spite of it all, Jordan's mind never ceased to function. While other children his age fretted about homework or video games, Jordan drew circuits on bits of paper, diagrammed in the margins of discarded newspapers, and experimented with junk radios he scavenged from dumpsters. He possessed a gift, an unbreakable talent for grasping machines, wires, and the intangible movement of electricity. He was able to see what no one else saw: patterns, balance, the secret language of circuits, but nobody bothered to look. To most, he was only another homeless child, another face in the crowd. That evening, as the blackout became more profound, the city's tension became more oppressive. Engineers in neon vests labored frantically, hunched over knotted bundles of cables. Their flashlights sliced sharp shafts into the blackness. Now and again, sparks would flash, and the onlookers would gasp, step back. The murmurs turned to complaints, complaints to shouts. Shop owners worried about their registers and security. "I've got food spoiling in there," one man yelled, pounding on the door of his darkened store. Mothers clutched their children, whispering prayers. Elderly couples leaned on canes, whispering about how dangerous it was for the lights to stay out this long. The whole block pulsed with frustration and fear, and Jordan stood at the edge of it all. His hoodie hung off his shoulders, sleeves too long, the material frayed thin. His sneakers were scuffed up, soles almost non-existent. His small backpack was weighted on his back, the only thing he had been able to protect. Within were his most valued possessions: a useless screwdriver, some wires, and creased notebooks full of drawings of electrical circuits. To anyone else, those were useless scraps. To him, they were evidence of who he was, evidence that his mind operated differently. As he observed the engineers, Jordan's eyes slit. He saw it, the error. They continued to reroute power in the same manner, taking the same unsuccessful steps, unaware the backup lines were shorting due to the uneven load. To Jordan, it was as clear as day. To them, it was invisible. He stepped forward, his chest pounded with his heart, but his voice remained firm. "I know what's wrong," he said. At first, nobody heard him. The sound of the crowd overpowered him. He tried to speak again, louder. "I know what's wrong, let me try." This time, they turned. Some scowled, others laughed. A street kid, saying he could repair the city's power grid. It was absurd. "Go ahead, kid, run along," one man snarled. "This isn't playtime." Others snickered, shaking their heads. To them, it was just another boy attempting to be important. But Jordan didn't blink. His gaze remained on the transformer, sparks still crackling perilously in the darkness. He spoke louder, not pleading, not nervous, but authoritative. "You're loading the lines incorrectly. If you just keep patching like this, it'll just continue to short out." The crowd was hushed. His words had an odd gravity. Some glared at him, some stared. "What's this kid saying?" Somebody complained. "Does he think he's smarter than the engineers?" Another jeered. "He probably doesn't even know what a transformer is." But in the sea of people, one of the engineers looked up. He was fatigued, forehead slick with sweat, face creased with frustration. He looked at the boy for a second. There was something in the boy's voice, not arrogance, not childlike naivete, but conviction. "Let me try," Jordan said again. His voice was quieter now, but firm. He held the backpack strap tightly, as if holding on to courage. The mutters grew loud. Some laughed, others shook their heads. One shopkeeper yelled, "Don't waste your time on him." One woman whispered, "Poor little hungry kid." But still, Jordan did not budge. He remained rooted to the spot, his eyes fixed on the machine, his mind racing with answers. For a boy no one trusted, for a boy unseen by the world, this was his moment, perhaps the sole moment to be seen. And even though nearly everyone brushed him off, one engineer hesitated. He didn't know why, but there was something about the boy's steady tone that made him hesitate. But the kid didn't blink. He didn't back up. His voice didn't crack. "You've been looking at the wrong connections," he said, gesturing toward the sparking transformer. "It's not the lines, it's the balance of the load. If you let me have a shot, I can get it sorted." A shiver of unease ran through the crowd. The engineers looked at one another in skepticism. A homeless kid who said he could repair what trained experts could not. It was ridiculous, almost comical. And yet, there was something in the Canaan manner in which he spoke, not with arrogance, not with mendicancy, but with assurance. The people didn't realize yet, but those soft words, "Let me try," would signal the start of something remarkable. Because within a matter of minutes, this overlooked child would accomplish what no other could. He would create light out of darkness, and in so doing, he would alter not just the evening, but the direction of his life. The chief engineer, fatigued by hours of frustration, massaged his temples and let out a deep, weary breath. His pride rebelled at the thought, but hopelessness will open doors. Pride closes. He regarded the boy, gaunt, unkempt, and not yet old enough to drive, and spoke words that stunned everyone. "Okay, kid," he grumbled. "Give us what you think you can do." The crowd erupted instantly. Some laughed in disbelief, others gasped, and a few shook their heads with disgust. "You've got to be kidding me," one man barked. "We're trusting a homeless kid with the grid." Another woman hissed under her breath. "This is reckless. If he breaks it worse, we'll be in the dark for days." But the engineer refused to budge, too exhausted to mind the consequences. "Let him attempt it," he said, his tone level but tired. "Nothing else has succeeded." Jordan's heart pounded in his chest as he moved forward, his scuffed sneakers scraping against the concrete. For a fleeting moment, he felt every set of eyes upon him, eyes filled with disbelief, judgment, questioning, and mockery. His own hands quivered slightly, not because he was afraid to fail, but because of the gravity of the opportunity that had been extended to him. This was his turn, and he knew that if he failed, it would be the last time anyone would ever hear him. He knelt beside the open transformer box. The air was filled with the acrid, metallic smell of ozone. Wires whirred softly, glowing faintly like coiled serpents about to strike. Monitors overhead flashed red warnings across their screens, casting a deathly light over his face. Jordan crouched forward, his eyes squinting, closing out the din of the crowd. He was seeing what nobody else was. The diverted power was stressing the backup system, pushing too much current through one overloaded circuit. To most eyes, it appeared to be chaos, but to Jordan, it was as obvious as a puzzle with all the pieces in place. "You're diverting too much power here," he explained quietly, gesturing with authoritative commands that surprised the engineers. His voice lost its nervous timbre of a boy and now carried the cutting tone of one who knew. "The standbys are shorting due to the unbalanced load." The crowd murmured louder. Some scoffed, others whispered nervously. Could this kid really understand what trained professionals couldn't? The father holding his daughter shook his head in disbelief. A shopkeeper whispered, "If he messes this up, we'll lose everything." But still, no one stopped him. Jordan dug into his skinny, faded pack. From it, he extracted a small screwdriver, rusty, the handle broken, but still working. It was his only tool, and he grasped it like a sword. He worked the tip into the knotted mass of wires, fiddling with one connection with slow, controlled motions. A cascade of sparks erupted, illuminating the evening sky briefly. Gas waves swept through the crowd, and a mother jerked her child back reflexively. But Jordan didn't bat an eyelid. His eyes remained intent, his breathing steady, his movements controlled. He cinched one connection, slackened another, then gingerly stripped the wire with the flat edge of his tool and turned it in tight. Each movement was smooth, as if he had performed it 100 times, though no one had ever witnessed him do it. His thoughts moved quicker than his fingers, computing currents, anticipating responses, and imagining electricity flowing like life. Then he swung around at the system monitor. Fingers sprung over the keyboard, striking commands with pace and assurance that amazed the engineers leaning over him. It wasn't the wild typing of a guesser. It was the calm, rhythmic input of one who knew. He skipped around error codes, rerouted the load, retuned the flow. The screen blazed with warning messages, then stopped, then accepted his commands. And then it occurred. At first, it was a lone bulb flashing in the distance, a street lamp that pulsed feebly, then stabilized. The crowd stood stock still. Another street lamp flickered on again, then another, until the whole line of them glimmered to life. People gasped. A child cried out, "Look!" Window after window came on. Houses glowed with the golden softness of lamps and televisions humming back into operation. Refrigerators hummed once more, heaters roared to life, and a wave of relief swept through the block. Store signs crackled and flared, neon letters blazing against the night. And then, as if in perfect harmony, the whole neighborhood burst with light. There was a moment of silence, complete silence. The sort that happens when individuals see something they don't quite accept. And then there were the cheers. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers of happiness. Strangers slapped other strangers on the back. Children bounced up and down. Mothers wrapped their children in tight hugs. And even the store owners who had been complaining mere moments ago raised their arms in triumph. And at the center was Jordan's. A boy with no family, no home, no notice taken of him. And the one who had taken power back in minutes when professionals failed. His chest swelled and fell with deep breaths, but his eyes shone with something more powerful than weariness, pride. For the first time in years, Jordan wasn't invisible. He wasn't the boy who was passed by without noticing. He wasn't the shadow in the crowd. He was the reason the shadows had receded. And while he stood silently, saying nothing amid the thunder of cheers, inside, he knew it. A door had opened. A door that would perhaps at last take him out of the shadows. For a brief moment, the world seemed to tilt for Jordan. The shouting was ear-splitting. Hands patted his shoulders, ruffled his hair, even shook his hand. "That's some talent, kid," one of them yelled. A woman put hands together in front of her face and shouted out, "Bless you, child." Even crusty shopkeepers who a few minutes before had complained about losing money applauded and whistled. The engineers themselves took a step back, mouths agape, heads shaking. "How did he see that?" One whispered to himself. "We would have been here all night." "That kid's mind is like a machine," another muttered, almost with wonder. Jordan's chest expanded. For the first time in his short life, he was no longer invisible. For the first time, the world wasn't passing by him as if he were nothing. During that brief golden space of time, amidst the sparkle of the streetlights that he himself had rejuvenated, he was a hero. But reality has a wicked knack for dashing dreams just as rapidly as it constructs them. The clapping started to subside as the thud of heavy footsteps grew louder. Out of the perimeter of the crowd stepped a man in a well-pressed suit, his hard-soled shoes tapping the asphalt. He had the reflective vest of authority, not the type that functioned with wires, but the type that sported clipboards and titles. The manager from the utility company. His face was not one of admiration, but annoyance. He moved directly in front of Jordan, looming over him with a scowl etched deeply into his face. "Good job, kid," he growled, his tone flat, nearly resentful. And then his words sliced harder. "But this ain't a game. Aim. Let the real professionals do the work." The sentence stung like a slap. The cheers stalled. The applause lagged, then died away entirely. Some members of the crowd averted their eyes uncomfortably, as if ashamed to have cheered too soon. A few nodded silently in agreement. "Well, he's just a kid," someone whispered. Another shrugged. "Yeah, just got lucky probably." Jordan's heart fell. Only seconds before he had been elevated high, a messiah to those who had suspected him. Now he was being pushed back into the darkness where he had always dwelled. In an instant, the heat of recognition became the bitter bite of dismissal. He ordered his team to log what had happened and to move on. He did not ask Jordan for his name. He did not give him a thank you. Instead, he waved the boy aside as if he were a child who was interfering in grown-ups' business. The engineers, torn between admiration for what Jordan had accomplished and deference to their boss, held their tongues. They refused to meet his gaze, their appreciation now masked by professionalism. Jordan took the hurtful blow deep within his chest. The world had embraced him briefly and closed its arms back up again. He had rescued all of them, and yet they saw only a homeless kid, a nobody. He wanted to shout, to protest, to demand they see what he could do. But his throat closed tight, the weight of rejection pressing hard. He clutched the strap of his backpack, suddenly feeling small again, as though the light he had brought back to the neighborhood hadn't touched him at all. But then, a voice cut through the crowd. It wasn't loud, but it was steady, firm. A woman's voice. "Don't you dare ignore that child." People turned. In the periphery of the crowd stood Miss Evelyn. She was in her late 60s, her hair silvered and pulled tightly back, her figure small but erect with pride. She had a plain coat, buttoned tightly against the cold, and spectacles that shone in the streetlight, but it was her eyes, sharp, unflinching, full of conviction that drew people in. She stepped forward, her cane tapping against the pavement, her presence cutting through the sea of people until she stood near Jordan. She looked at the manager squarely, her chin lifted. "You saw what he just did," she said, her voice carrying like a teacher who would not be ignored. "That wasn't luck. That was genius." The onlookers stirred. Some slowly nodded, remembering the assurance in Jordan's steps, the accuracy of his work. They had witnessed it themselves. This was no fluke. The manager shifted uneasily, obviously not accustomed to being questioned. "Ma'am," he started, "with all due respect, this is very technical work." The boy was lucky, but lucky. Miss Evelyn's voice snapped like a whip. "You and your crew waited here for hours, feeling your way around in the dark. This kid comes strolling up, tells you the exact thing that was wrong, and it's fixed in minutes. That's not luck. That's genius." Jordan blinked in shock. Nobody had ever stood up for him like this. Not since his parents. The ring of her defense around him was like a shield, cushioning him against the pain of rejection. The crowd drew closer. There were some soft applause again, hesitant at first, then louder. A fellow in the back shouted, "She's right." Another woman chimed in, "That boy saved us." Miss Evelyn put a hand on the shoulder of Jordan. "How many times have children like this been ignored? How many minds lost because nobody takes the trouble to notice them? Not tonight. Not him." The silence that ensued was thick, laden with reality. Even the engineers hung their heads a little, ashamed. For Jordan, the moment was unbelievable. Betrayal still smoldered in his chest, the bitter sting of being discarded so easily. But alongside it now emerged something new, hope. Because one voice had refused to let the world forget him. And sometimes all it takes is one voice. Miss Evelyn didn't only talk that night, she performed. Once the crowd had started to break up and the brightness of the lights being put back on had faded over the block, she faced Jordan with eyes full of something he had never really seen in grown-ups' trust. "You did something amazing," she murmured, her hand still firm on his shoulder. "And I won't let the world forget it." Jordan, shaken still from the emotional, maelstrom, the applause, the rejection, her defense, could only manage a nod. His voice shaking, he whispered, "But I'm nobody. They don't care about me." Her lips curled into a tiny, knowing smile. "That's where you're wrong, child. You're somebody. You just need a chance for others to see it." That evening, she didn't let him go back to the chilly streets. She took him into her humble home, a little neat house with an abundance of warmth that was not generated by money, but love. She placed a plate of food in front of him, hot steaming, the type of meal that bore comfort in every mouthful. Jordan ate silently at first, half besparkled that this act of kindness would be genuine. But Miss Evelyn did not hurry him. She sat across from the table, drinking tea, giving him the silence after a night which had screamed so loudly. In the days to come, she started taking him to meet people. Initially, simply neighbors who'd witnessed what he'd done, people who wished to shake hands with him, to thank him. Later, through her network as a retired teacher, she invited in educators, mentors, and community leaders. The news spread more rapidly than either of them anticipated. Within weeks, Jordan's tale made it to the local news. Reporters arrived with cameras and notebooks, pleading with him to demonstrate what he had accomplished. Nervously at first, his voice tiny in front of microphones. But Miss Evelyn was by his side, urging him to talk the way he had when describing the overloaded transformer. And soon enough, his quiet brilliance started to shine through. The tale spread farther. A city newspaper covered it, then a local television network. Headlines referred to him as the boy who brought back the lights. The video of that evening, shaky cell phone footage of a kid with a backpack and a screwdriver restoring electricity, spread on the web. Folks from all over the nation were astonished, motivated, and profoundly touched. Donations flowed in. Strangers sent letters. Families sent shoes, books, and school supplies. One local university professor contacted him, volunteering to mentor him. Shortly thereafter, a scholarship fund was established in his honor. What had started with one boy repairing a blackout became the beginning of a movement, a reminder that genius can arise from the unlikeliest of locations. For Jordan, it was a little too much. He had existed incognito all these years, scrounging for leftovers, not noticed at every turn. Now the world wanted to notice him, to fate him. And although it was scary, Miss Evelyn was there at every turn, steady, patient, leading him along with the hand of someone who noticed not merely a child, but a future. Years went by. Jordan matured, both in size and strength, but also in mission. With the scholarship money at his back and guides surrounding him, he studied engineering. The lad who had once had just one screwdriver now had books, instruments, and thoughts too vast for most classrooms to hold. It wasn't always simple. There were setbacks, moments when the burden of expectation became too great, when the scars of rejection would tease him with the possibility that perhaps he didn't belong after all. But whenever doubt began to creep, he recalled that night on the starless sky when he had been rejected by many, but championed by one. He recalled Miss Evelyn's words. That wasn't luck, that was genius. And so he continued on. Years afterwards, the day arrived when Jordan crossed the stage at his university graduation. The hall was packed with beaming families, the atmosphere humming with applause. His name was announced: Jordan Alexander Williams, Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering, with honors. He strode proudly, his head held high, his heart overflowing. The cheers enveloped him. Not momentary this time, not insincere. They were genuine, they were one. And between the throngs of faces, he spotted Miss Evelyn in the front row, her silvered hair now a bit more sparse, her body a bit slimmer, but her eyes still quick, still keen, still full of pride. She applauded with tears in her eyes, muttering to herself, "I knew it all along." Jordan didn't rest on his laurels. Armed with his degree, he shifted focus to the communities that were like the one waiting for him back home, marginalized, downtrodden, too often left behind. He created new energy systems that were cost-effective, sustainable, and reliable. He worked not in boardrooms remote from the public, but in neighborhoods that most needed the light. Whole communities thrived because of his innovations. Homes that had only ever been dark and quiet during blackouts now shone with constant, dependable power. Children read at night under light that never dimmed. Families sat together in comfort rather than freezing in the cold. And every time a light bulb shone where there had been none before, Jordan recalled the night he had been the spark himself, and he never forgot the woman who believed in him when no one else would. Whenever he addressed the public, at conventions, in interviews, at awards events, he always closed with her name. "I am here because of Miss Evelyn," he would say, "one person who refused to allow me to be invisible." She was his anchor, his family, the sole continuity in a life that had been founded on second chances. And during her old age, when someone would ask her how she felt about the boy whom she had stood up for that evening, she would smile and say merely, "I simply saw his light before the rest of the world discovered it." Because sometimes all it takes is one person to believe. And from that faith, a forgotten boy became a man who lit the world.